In this episode of the Omega Podcast, we have co-founders of Bot Mediation, Curtis Holdsworth, Darren Fancher, and Nick Hikita from Bot Mediation. Their pioneering AI mediator is here to make legal processes smoother and more affordable. Digitized for excellence.
Welcome to the Omega Podcast with Curtis and Nick from Bot Mediation. It is such a pleasure to have you both on the Omega Podcast.
Thanks. Good to see you, Keenan.
Awesome. It's great to be seen. I know you both are in the sunny California area, and there is so much to discuss in our conversation about bot mediation, legal dispute, legal technology. I am super excited, as well as our listeners, to get right into our conversation. But before we unravel more about bot mediation, what inspired you both to start bot mediation?
Thanks, Keenan. My background is in business litigation and commercial litigation, complex litigation. And so over the years, I've been involved in quite a few resolutions of legal disputes, ranging from doing things, the easy way and doing things the hard way. So in my world, that means trying cases, taking cases through trial at one extreme, and the other is resolving cases. And one of the most common ways to resolve a case these days is with the help of a third party, with the help of what we call a mediator. Some folks refer to them as neutrals more frequently, but a lot of times it's difficult to resolve a dispute with just two parties without an objective, third party, commenting on the strengths and weaknesses of your position and sharing that with the other side and being a facilitator. However, that process, that pick and shovel, if you will, process of negotiation is almost as old as time, and haven't seen any significant sort of evolution, if you will, in that field the way or with the same speed I've observed it with AI in legal deliverables for attorneys. So lots of advancements for lawyers, not so much for in the world of mediation. And so the inspiration here was to see if AI has come far enough to be able to build a system that could facilitate resolution for parties much faster, much less expensively than having a live mediator.
Yeah. Now, I know having legal costs can add up thousands and thousands of dollars that people are spending toward having an attorney, having legal advice. I mean, it can be a pretty penny. But when it comes to the cost for bot mediators, what sets bot mediation apart from, for instance, hiring an attorney?
Yeah, great question. They still would be hiring an attorney for a bot mediation, the same as a conventional mediation. But the big cost savings has to do with the time of scheduling and the time sitting in a room with that many professionals. So the first part, the time of scheduling, is a big factor because in my experience, there's this dance that we go through of, I want this mediator, you don't trust her, you want that mediator, I don't trust him. And so we could spend a good week or two just, nibbling around the cookie of who we both trust. And a lot of times it ends up being by default. It's not somebody that I trust or I've used before, but we often have a strike list. So we'll have, 5 names, I'll strike 2, you'll strike 2, and then we agree whoever's the last man or woman standing is the mediator. That's a common approach. So that takes time. And all the while I'm working on the case, litigating the case, just like the opposing lawyer. And then once we do end up with a mediator, the good ones are often booked out many weeks or months. And so what that means is we have to do work on the case while we are waiting for mediation because we just don't know for sure if it will settle. And there are a lot of pretrial deadlines that have to be met, irrespective of whether there's a good faith settlement effort that's underway. And so bot mediation can take that, process, which is usually a couple, 2 or 3 months, and compress it into a week or less to be able to get into a mediation, because there is no such thing as scheduling a human mediator. You don't have that barrier to it. And then just also the session itself is a huge cost savings, because normally I'd sit in a room, whether it's a virtual room or a live room with a mediator, most of the day or all day. sometimes longer than an 8-hour day, just depending on the case. And to have me sitting there, opposing counsel sitting there, and a mediator sitting there on the clock, that's really a lot of expense. Out of pocket for a mediator can be, $6, $8, $10, $15,000 a day, whether you settle or not. So it's a really heavy load of expense to sit in a live mediation. This is compressed into give or take about an hour.
Yeah, that's definitely a lot of time. And as you mentioned, extreme costs. The one thing that comes to mind, especially when it comes to mediation, is guidance. You mentioned earlier in your response regarding trust and transparency. If I'm getting advice from a bot, how do I trust that, especially when it comes to the guidance that it's providing me? Should I follow the bot mediator's guidance, or can I negotiate freely? Is it more structured? Is there like sort of a prompt that I have to follow?
That's a perfect question for Nick, our head of product. Let him take that one.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think there's a couple different answers I can provide you on that one, Keenan. Number one is, we give parties the autonomy, obviously, to negotiate as they would in a real mediation. I think what sets Bot apart from, other, call it digital solutions out there for ADR and so forth, is the fact that we do provide mediator guidance, which is based on real case data. So that's one of our key differentiators there, is that the recommendations or the guidance that the bot mediator will provide the parties is based off of, real cases, which I don't think anyone else out there can say that they do. And again, it's up to the parties to choose whether or not they want to follow that guidance. But typically, if the party were to go ahead and take those recommendations, we find that the ability to settle is actually improved quite a bit for both parties.
Yeah, the ability to settle. Trust me, if you're a business owner listening, you know that there's a lot of litigation that you have to deal with, and negotiating and finding the right terms of the agreement is definitely a struggle. But when it comes to those possible outcomes of bot mediation session, does the system generate a mediator's proposal for how they can go about reaching a settlement agreement? Or is there more of a template where you have to go to your attorney, other parties, in order to reach that engagement?
So I'll go ahead and field that one too, I guess, because it's a bit of the same question. The short answer is yes, we do provide a mediator's proposal. And that's really done in situations where the mediator feels like the parties are close, but not quite there yet. And it's another opportunity for them to be able to settle in session ultimately.
Very well said. Now, just to sort of pair to anyone experiencing being a part of any legal dispute, that there's a lot of emotional disparity, especially with people being very anxious, very stressed. How do you foresee the role of technology, right, bot mediation, in reducing the emotional toll that legal disputes often have with individuals? Does that have some sort of emotional relief for folks?
Yeah, I'll field this one, Keenan. It's a difficult. It's really a deep question, actually, because when you're talking about emotion in a negotiation, there can be emotion of the party relative to what happened to them. In many instances, one of the parties feels that they're a victim, and it doesn't necessarily need to be the plaintiff. There's plenty of litigation where the defendant feels the plaintiff is being opportunistic, either in terms of, blaming them for something that is a natural occurrence, but not the result of, intentional or negligent behavior, or sometimes in terms of, puffery or, augmenting the true damage or the true harm. And in that instance, the defendant could feel victimized, just as much as a plaintiff might. So you have that component of emotion that can come into a negotiation. And admittedly, AI mediation does not have all the nuance, all the texture of talking to a human being yet. The technology is not that far advanced at this point. On the other hand, it can diffuse, emotion that can be negative to the process as well, because you can have either a lawyer or a litigant who is a bully who, says things that are not constructive to getting a deal done. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. And I think this also speaks to the issue of, elimination of bias and accessibility to the process. So if there could be irrational reasons I don't trust or respect the neutral, and that could be an impediment to getting where I need to go. And likewise, there could be some unfair biases against me or my client or my case type that prevents the neutral from really getting the other side to where they should be based on the merits of the case. So on the one hand, there's a weakness, if you will, of AI mediation in terms of being able to one-on-one as a person, neutral counsel parties. On the other hand, it is a great tool to eliminate some of the human factor that can actually be a detriment to the process and inject some biases that could compromise the negotiation process.
Yes, that's definitely very important. And as we think about biases when it comes to these bot mediations, you mentioned earlier in your response that you guys leverage existing case studies to help with developing the prompts, right, from existing case studies that people can be able to look into in order to extract that data from. Now, when it comes to bias specifically, are you guys able to find case studies that are readily available, or do you have someone kind of in the back end sourcing to make sure that this isn't the output that your users are getting? I mean, what is your approach to alleviating bias within this particular tool?
Yeah, and another excellent question, Keenan. Case studies, I think, are a bit different than what we rely upon. We're relying upon what I would call like raw data as opposed to case studies. So we're not going out into the public domain and harvesting information, either raw information in the public domain or case studies, which would be sort of a summarization or treatise, if you will, on or speaking to that data. Rather, we are actually evaluating actual negotiation data on real cases, and then have built our system based on that data to build our AI. And then in time, that data will be examined as more and more negotiations are processed through our system, and then that in turn will inform our algorithms and enable us to update and refine our algorithms and build more and more case types within our system. So, for example, right now, it's designed to handle employment matters and personal injury matters, but it certainly has a much broader potential application once we have additional data for additional case types.
That's great. And the fact that you highlighted those specific case types, it makes me think to Nick, as you shared earlier, regarding some of those product development attributes. I mean, as to what Curtis was sharing as to those specific case types, as we think to the future of AI-powered mediation, do you see this particular tool expanding to more case types, business litigation, divorce? It's just so important to make sure that we're expanding out. Do you see the tool leveraging that particular capacity?
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. I mean, in fact, we were just at a major tech conference this past week in Chicago, and we had a number of, prospective customers, prospective users come up to us and ask us the same question as far as whether or not we plan to tackle those specific use cases. And the short answer is yes. I think there's some additional digging that we need to do to really uncover the ins and outs of the use case, identify those pain points, and see how we can apply the product to solve those pain points ultimately. But I feel pretty confidently that what we have product-wise could serve as an alleviation to some of the problems that users might be facing with, divorce cases, family law, for example, lemon law. These are all use cases that I think are definitely within the grasp of bot mediation.
Perfect. So if I was on your website and I'm ready and eager to get involved, what are the next steps? How do I get started with my first bot mediation?
Yeah, I can feel that one too. So it's really simple. I mean, it's basically no different than a traditional mediation. So you can go to our website, you can submit a request. There's a variety of different channels that we offer. You can schedule a meeting with us to discuss your matter via Calendly. So we have our calendar available on our website. You can send us an email directly and basically invite the other party to use bot mediation. So the process is pretty straightforward. Once parties agree to use bot mediation, they'll go ahead and submit their intakes, usually mediation brief, summarization, and some other supporting documents. And then we'll go ahead and retrieve those documents, ingest them into our system. And basically, that'll pave the way for us to be able to program their session. So once we have that material, we basically have, a human mediator on the front end to actually review that information for conciseness. That helps us kind of promote some level of trust with the product as well, because it's not a full-fledged, just from the start to end AI solution. We do have some eyes on there as well. And once that actually happens, then we can get parties scheduled. And the nice thing about bot mediation is that you can schedule mediation as soon as parties are ready. So there's no waiting months or weeks to get on a mediator's calendar. Effectively, we could schedule tomorrow if parties wanted to. So that's the beauty of it. And once we get parties scheduled, we'll go ahead and transmit some login information information to the session, provide a pre-mediation conference, and parties can log in and negotiate.
Enjoying this episode of the Omega Podcast? We want to hear from you. Please share your thoughts or feedback in the comments. You can also visit omegaconsulting.online for more resources, insights, and industry updates. Let's get back to the executive conversation.
That's stellar. And as I think about the legal industry as a whole, this particular tool is revolutionizing so much. I mean, what are your long-term goals for your platform, and how do you hope this will impact the legal industry?
Yeah, I'll take a swing at this one, Keenan. I think, yes, this is very cutting edge in terms of what's out there for legal tech. I stomp around quite a bit. As you know, Nick was noting, just got back from the American Bar Association's, tech show, which is, their seminal event, annual, showcase, if you will, for new legal technologies. And there's a whole, bunch of, a gallery full of different legal tech companies. But Bot Mediation was the only ADR, alternative dispute resolution, AI solution in the entire, conference center. And that's a big building, over 1 million square feet of convention space. So there was a lot to look at this convention, but nothing like Bot Mediation. Likewise, we've been to, this is not the only trade show, legal tech show, lawyer convention we've been to. We stomp around regularly, and there really is nothing quite like it. So it is disruptive. And what I see for the future of Bot Mediation is a coexistence and a complementary tool to live mediators. I certainly don't expect, AI mediators or AI avatars to displace live mediators anytime soon. But I do think that there's a great place for it as a complement, perhaps for certain case types, perhaps for certain case sizes. It's just a great fit for time savings, for cost savings, etc. The analogy I like to use is an iPad. I think about Bot Mediation as the iPad of mediation. As to a live mediator, they are a MacBook Air Pro. Keyboard, amazing computing power, storage power, all of it. Nobody would think in a moment that you could replace and get rid of your MacBook Pro and work off of an iPad. It's just a completely dissimilar product in almost every way. But it doesn't mean an iPad has no value. It does. You give it to your kid on a plane, check a few emails, and stream a video. And for those purposes, it's a great tool. And so I think Bot Mediation is much the same. And in some instances, that MacBook Air Pro is overkill. It's more than what you need for certain tasks. And likewise, I think a live mediator is just much more than what you really need to be able to resolve a fairly large segment of legal disputes. And so that's the fit, and that's what it's built for.
Okay. Very interesting. Now, I know for our listeners, data privacy and concern is extremely important, especially when it comes to case-sensitive information, because it provides confidential information about where people live, social security information, etc. But how do you address concerns about data privacy and security for users of your AI-driven software?
I'm going to let Nick tackle this, but I think it would be nice for him to give a little foundation about his professional background, because he comes to the business with a heightened level of sensitivity about the security of data, and he came from a much bigger organization, where he cut his teeth, years ago. So I'll let Nick talk about his specialization in that field, and then particularly, what he's done within the universe of Bot Mediation to leverage that background that he has.
Yeah, thanks, Curtis. So, I started out my career many years ago at this point as a consultant with Deloitte in their risk practice, enterprise risk practice. So for me, data security has always been paramount in anything that I do. My career has taken me through many different positions and roles, all of which have kind of been centered around the product of the software space. And so, as data security in today's world is ultimately getting more and more important as hackers are becoming more, let's call it, how do I put this? They're becoming a lot smarter and a lot better at what they do. So we also need to be better at protecting our data. And that's no different for bot mediation. Ultimately, our customers' data, we treat it like our own. And we've built that into a lot of our processes. When parties ingest data into our platform, they have the confidence knowing that we have data security practices in place, HIPAA compliance, because we do deal with some sensitive information on the healthcare side. And then ultimately, too, there's a big question nowadays around large language models and how data is ultimately going into those models. Is it secure or not? And so one of the nice things is a lot of these proprietary models, well, I should say that when you go down that route, you actually work with the model provider to sign levels of agreement with business agreements and so forth. And you actually take your data off of their public model. So really anything that goes into the model, it's not being retrained upon. And this is something that we ultimately need to help for our product to make sure that it's secure. And so that's one of the things that we definitely keep an eye on.
Yeah, it's almost as if you're getting this feedback and being told, these are the important areas to hyper focus on. I mean, what feedback have you received from other attorneys using the platform, and how has that influenced your approach to improving the software?
Yeah, that's been a critical part of the development process, and we're fortunate to work with Darren Fancher. He couldn't make it here today, but hopefully we'll get another crack, and we'll run a part two at some point if you'll have us back. But Darren already has built an enterprise, SaaS company that was very successful in the legal field, and he exited from that company several years ago. So he brought a wealth of knowledge about what it means to build enterprise software, and particularly what it means to build it with lawyers in mind as the end customer. And so for us, this is a bit of a rinse and repeat exercise in a good way, insofar as he has already developed, built, and sold enterprise software. And in that process, he learned, if he had not already known this, to listen carefully to your users, listen carefully to your end customers. And so what our process was building an MVP, a minimum viable product early on, and then basically interviewing under an NDA, lawyer after lawyer, mediator after mediator, defense counsel and plaintiff counsel, all different stakeholders, if you will, that have different, along the spectrum of potential users and people that we thought were authoritative figures in this field. And we took all sorts of notes, and ultimately we logged dozens and dozens of notes, suggestions, critiques, compliments, what have you. And then Darren converted that into an actual punch list for our development team. And based on his wisdom, he categorized, this lengthy list into sort of versions of the product and must-have versus nice-to-have categories. So, for example, he would take the things that he felt were most important, themes that were repeated over and over again, feedback that was redundant among lawyers, put that in a must-have column. And then within the must-have column, he would put a label on it in terms of which version he thought the technology or the build speed of our dev team would enable us to implement it. So at the time we called MVP, bot 1.0. Okay. So if it was a fairly light lift, then according to our lead developer, then he would call that, 1.25. If it was more involved lift or, something, might call like an epic story, then he might call that, bot 2.0. And so that gave us the strategy and sort of the prioritization of what should be built to mirror and to meet the need and the most important needs and pressing needs that were being expressed by the attorneys. So, the term Nick likes to use, I guess, the items that, were like hair on fire, things that the lawyer said that they must have and they really wanted to see were the things that we built as quickly and tested and deployed as quickly as we could. But there were all sorts of iteration, all circling around the future user feedback. So the bot mediation was certainly not built in a vacuum. It is the manifestation of feedback and the wishes of dozens and dozens of the best, judges, lawyers, and mediators that we know.
Perfect. Well, it sounds like you guys have had a lot of feedback from attorneys, litigators, mediators, from the entire ecosystem when it comes to just the legal industry. So that's very confirming for those that would be using this particular tool. Are there any special offers for our listeners?
Yeah, Nick, go ahead, man.
Yeah, so I think right now the special that we've kind of introduced, really, and this is to attract more early adopters, is look, our pricing is what it is. It's public on our website, but ultimately we don't want you to pay us unless you settle. So it's kind of a risk-free offer for folks to get up and sign up with Bot Mediation and test it out. Love it ultimately, and if you don't love it, then you can walk away, nothing lost.
Perfect. Are there any final remarks or thoughts that you would leave our listeners with?
All right. One of the other things I'd like to touch upon is the value add of a bot mediation, even if a dispute doesn't settle. So, for example, if there's a pre-dispute agreement to attempt an AI mediation, before any further escalation of a legal problem or issue, you can imagine the value of even getting the parties to the table, getting them in the same place at the same time, having both sides with the mindset that we're here to make a good faith effort towards settlement. And let's say you think you're entitled to $100,000 and I really don't want to pay you more than $5,000. If we go through a bot mediation and you've given some ground, I've given some ground, and now you're thinking probably around 50,000 would be okay, and you're up to offering 30,000 or so. Now you're so much closer, Keenan, right? Now there's no point. You basically dissipated, the justification for litigation. I mean, you're just too close to get lawyers involved or to get lawyers active on your respective behalf, because there's just not enough meat on the bones to justify that level of effort and that cost anymore. And so you could get off the platform without actually closing a settlement and then get on the phone and you've got this great momentum to close out a settlement without too much rigor and too much expense any further by each side. So we see as much value add, frankly, as getting the parties going, getting them warmed up and making progress towards a settlement as actually culminating settlement on the platform. This is back at you. What was your instinct? Because Keenan, I know you and Omega, the bigger manifestation of you as an entrepreneur. What was sort of your initial gut reaction to bot mediation, just from the 10,000 foot level as an outsider, because your background isn't law. So I'm curious to, kind of get outside of this bubble of attorneys and just see, what a practical, smart business entrepreneur thinks about the solution or the philosophy, because I spent so much time mired in legal minds. I like to get just a professional opinion from your business perspective. Do you see all sorts of technology, and you work with all sorts of technology, and your tech stack, I know at Omega, is deep. So yeah, go ahead and share what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I would love to take a crack at that. And I also want to open it up to our listeners too. So put it in the comments, share with Curtis and Nick so we can definitely share some additional perspectives. But for me, when I first saw bot mediation, I thought it was extremely innovative. As a business owner, there's always that risk that you will be sued at one point or another. As much as you try to alleviate it, there's always something or someone that's unsatisfied with your service, your product, and they're always trying to get something out in return. So always looking for ways to mediate that and find new ways to reach a resolution much faster, much quicker, and less pricey, as you mentioned earlier. So for me, it was definitely an interesting perspective and interesting take. Now, mind you, I have not used the software, but from what I've seen on your website, it seems extremely promising for what will be happening, especially in the legal industry. Now, I definitely would love to hear from other business owners that are going through litigation right now with current employees, from you can think of employment issues. You can think of human resource related matters. So to see how that might help in that particular sector. But again, bot mediation sounds extremely promising, and I'm excited to see where you guys take it.
Awesome. Really appreciate that, man.
Yeah, for sure. Well, again, it's such a pleasure to have you both on the Omega podcast. Excited to hear and to see how you guys continue to grow and scale over the next few months and years to come. And again, thank you for being on the Omega podcast.
Thanks, Omega. Thanks, Keenan.
Stay tuned for more from Bot Mediation.
You got it.
Amazing.